Hello, welcome to the News Tech Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thanks for joining us today. This is Swapnil Bhartia for the News Tech, and we are here at KubeCon Austin, Texas. Let's meet today's guest.
So I'm Mark Hinkle. I'm the executive director of the Node.js Foundation. I've spent the last 20 years working in open source. Before this, I was the VP of marketing at the Linux Foundation. And before that, I worked at Citrix, where I ran their open source office, Cloud.com, which was an open source cloud platform. I worked with them and started out early in my career working for internet service providers that all used open source so that we could make a buck back then because margins were tight. So that's my background.
Thanks, Mark, for the introduction. Being the executive director of the Node.js Foundation, what's your perspective on where does Node.js fit in as the market dynamics is changing?
So one thing that's very interesting is even though JavaScript has been around for 20 years, it is becoming a first-class citizen for developing enterprise applications. And what makes that very interesting is because it's been around for 20 years, there's a large core of development talent out there that's familiar with JavaScript. The thing that's been novel about Node.js is that Node.js allows you to run JavaScript on the server, and because you can run JavaScript on the server, you can now write applications that run end-to-end in JavaScript by virtue of Node.js. So that is what is interesting about JavaScript today versus 20 years ago, where it was browser manipulation, flashy menus, things like that. Now, because it has become the language of the browser and it has a complete set of technologies the whole way to the server, you can do all sorts of interesting things.
You did touch upon how the web technology is also involved from those flashing content to the so now there are always buzzwords, new buzzword, we see function as a service or serverless. How ready or how prepared is it for the server?
So I would venture to say that Node.js is the number one workload across serverless infrastructure out there. It was the first solution that ran on Amazon Lambda, Google Functions. It's the largest workload that runs on IBM Blue Mix. It is very well suited for serverless applications because serverless applications are typically single function microservices that are event driven, and JavaScript applications are a perfect use case for the serverless environment.
Right. And as we have seen, the landscape continues to change, new technology. So what are the big challenges that you're seeing, and if you put that in the context of your roadmap, can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think that Node typically has been user-driven, and the roadmap has not been as clearly defined. So the one thing that we did to make sure people understood that Node was a stable platform is we went to a long-term support strategy. So we have a single long-term support release that comes out every year, and in between that, then we have another release as well that is more avant-garde. But people can now depend on a stability and long-term support on Node.js. So that's one of the first things on the roadmap. The other thing is really the improved performance and the extensibility. And the thing about Node.js is that it flourishes in an ecosystem of packages that extend Node.js and JavaScript. So those packages are maintained in the NPM registry or in private registries. And there is a huge number of those packages out there. Over 3 billion packages are downloaded every week from the NPM registry for Node users. There are 4,800 new packages that come online every week. And those packages go from a large range of use cases. So some of them are more app to be used for building APIs and API toolkit type applications. Some are IoT, some are mobile, but because there are so many packages available to the platform, that we want to keep the platform very lightweight and focused, and then allow the extensibility to happen via the modules. So,
you said that the release cycle is going to be like an yearly release cycle.
We do two main releases a year, usually spring and fall.
Okay.
And so this fall was our long-term support release.
Okay.
And then that's the release between is more developmental and cutting edge.
Okay. And when you talk about these thousands and thousands of packages, or Linux Foundation and a lot of other, they keep coming up with reports that there is a big gap between supply and demand, or demand and supply of engineers, or developers. So, so what are you doing to ensure that either there are developers who are kind of qualified to do the job, or some kind of certification program, or can you talk about that?
So we have some interesting programs within the community. We have Code and Learns, and we have Node Together, which focuses on getting underrepresented groups in tech up to speed as developers within the project. During those events, we try and have someone make their first pull request on the first day, which is a good hands-on approach to getting developers into the community. We also have a certification program, and that certification program is in beta right now that we hope to go live with in the first quarter of next year. And that will be a vendor-neutral certification for Node developers, so that people who are trying to hire Node developers can have some reasonable confidence that they have at least a minimum level of development capability.
So, and what's the name of the program?
It's the Node.js Certified Developer Program.
Okay. And it's when you say it's in beta stage, it's a certification program. So
the actual mechanisms, the questions. So we want to make sure that, and we have people who have signed up. We want to make sure that the program actually works. So it's a proctored exam over the internet. We want to make sure that the questions are there aren't any bias in the questions. So we have a psychometrician who actually is looking at the questions, but then we want to look at some of the initial respondents to make sure if there's a high that we are getting a good representative sample of people passing it that have that knowledge, and that the test is fair.
So there's a feedback loop where
Okay. And the thing that's interesting is, because it's not vendor driven, it's driven by our community and the foundation, is real Node developers, and quite a few of them are providing feedback into the development or into the certification process. So I think it's a pretty good gauge of the capabilities there.
But vendors would be involved, because eventually these developers are going to work in the market.
The vendors out there will be there for training purposes, but we will provide the certification as a neutral certification.
Right.
Which can only happen in a sort of foundation, open source driven kind of situation, because otherwise, like a Java certification would be driven by Oracle, or
So what was the primary driver behind this program? And the Linux Foundation does a lot of other certification also.
Yeah.
So let's break it. That will become a big question. So first of all, what was the reason? What do you see in the market where you see we should do that?
So it's just part of the maturation of technology.
Right.
So there is a huge user base of Node, and it's growing at an incredible rate. There's a huge need to hire developers, and there's very little way to vet those developers in a standard way for those companies that are trying to grow. So the certification provides a measure of developer competency that we wanted to provide. And that's really the main driver. Is if you look right now at some like Indeed.com and other job sites, the demand for Node developers is astounding. It's one of the top 10 tech jobs out there last time I checked. And so the ability to hire Node developers and not just JavaScript developers is important, and then it provides a foundation for other kinds of certifications that we may do along the way.
Right. This could be kind of interesting question, and that is like, yeah, we all know there is huge kind of gap there. But where are the actual developers or talents coming from? Because these certifications are for the people who already who are already developers, and you are just certifying them, okay, you do know this job. Yeah. But do you see this as a big problem that you would like to solve, or what is the solution to actually create developers?
Yeah, I mean, and the solution, it's a catch-up situation. For right now, the demand is far outstripping the supply for developers. Mm-hmm. And if we look at, we did our user and developer survey recently. If you have a technology like Node that has grown in the last 8 years at this rate it has, so last January of 2016, we had 3.5 million Node instances. As of today, we're approaching, or probably eclipsed, 9 million instances. So the number of instances has more than doubled in 18 months, and there's no way to get people that experience other than to immerse them into projects, give them good JavaScript training, and do things like we do in our Code and Learns and Node Together kind of situations.
I mean, we can go even deeper in this question, but do we also need some kind of changes at the education level itself?
I mean, I think that there is, when we looked at, one thing that we did evaluate was doing a massively online open source course in Node. Uh-huh. There are already plenty of training organizations out there that provide Node training. Mm-hmm. The key is to actually have hands-on experience.
Right. That's what I meant, because when I graduated, whatever I learned in the school, I'm not using at all. So that's what I said. It's a totally different question, that we may need as a society to change the whole structure of education to prepare ourselves for the.
Yeah, I think that the nice thing is that when I was in school, I ran, what I learned was Turbo Pascal and Fortran that ran on VAX VMS systems that were not accessible to the individual. Today, you can get a $200 laptop and run Node and teach yourself, or go to user groups, meetups, things like that. So I think the ability to learn and teach yourself is, not the ability, but the accessibility for those tools to teach yourself is there.
Right.
I think that the overall trend is, when you have a hot topic like this, the market will will provide jobs, and it will incent people to learn as quickly as possible that technology. So we are at KubeCon today. There are a lot of people who are very motivated to learn how to use Kubernetes, and I'm sure that they will continue to teach themselves and get better and work within their existing jobs. Same thing with Node, is when you have that kind of technology demand, and it's a very lucrative career right now to be a Node developer.
Right. It's a very good note to end this interview, but I have one last question. That was, that Linux Foundation runs a lot of certification programs. So how do you coordinate? And the interesting thing is that all the hot topic technologies, whether it's Kubernetes or Cloud Foundry or Node.js or Linux, so there's a lot of cross pollination also happens. So can you talk quickly about how do you benefit from each other?
Part of the Linux Foundation in general has a mission to provide sustainability in open source. So while some of these training topics are addressed by training organizations, things like Global Knowledge or Udemy or some of these other training companies, what the Linux Foundation's training strategy is to provide training and certification and run events that provide a sustainable ecosystem around open source projects. So it is part of a three-pronged approach. And one is having good governance. So Kubernetes was developed at Google, but now is part of CNCF. Node.js was developed at Joyent, which is now part of the Node.js Foundation. That's one, governance so that the whole ecosystem can participate on a level playing ground. Number two is it's very important to get developers and users together and interact. So that's why we have KubeCon and Cloud Native Con, and last month, or October, we actually had Node Interactive, which is the Node Developers Conference. And then the third thing is we're there to fill in holes within the certification space, so providing a vendor-neutral certification and training when training doesn't exist. So the Linux Foundation does provide Linux training. It does provide training on other topics, networking, et cetera, but mainly as a complement to the projects in the ecosystem that doesn't exist, because we're not in the business to run a training business on its own, as much as it is to make sure that we have a sustainable ecosystem around that technology.
Thanks. I got everything that I was looking for in this. Is there anything else? I think we covered a lot of broad topics.
I think we covered a lot.
Yeah.
It was
I
good.
was saying thanks for taking time out and talking to me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for watching. Listen to more episodes of the News Tech Makers at thenewstech.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.